Yes, thanks, Jacob. I'm going to share now. So, yeah, as Jacob mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the educational outreach we've done in New York State. And it's really been a team effort uh, from those including Jacob, who's been part of it for quite a while now, at Cornell's IPM program, other team members there, and Cornell faculty as well, who've been lending a hand, and our partner organizations. Can't thank everybody enough for all of the work together. Ag and Markets, Penn State in particular, sharing information has been fantastic. So this is one of the primary reasons we're concerned about it in New York State because of our important New York grape and wine industry, really key in our agriculture economy in New York State. You can see we have several regions starting in the east along Long Island, the Hudson Valley, and then the Finger Lakes, and the really important juice grape growing region along Lake Erie that extends into Pennsylvania and a little bit of Ohio as well. So um, this image from Pennsylvania was helpful early on to get the attention of our grape growers. It is sad that spotted lanternfly caused this kind of devastation early on before growers knew um, about the treatments that were necessary. And, there was a thought that after that initial wave went through, the populations would decline, and they do go down, but there are resurgence. And this picture was shared with me from Pennsylvania in fall of 2022 in an area that previous 2 years, the populations were lower and it was back up again. So this is an insect we're going to have to live with for a while. But going back to where we got started, my predecessor looking at spotted lanternfly started this map, and it was a way for our growers to keep track of where spotted lanternfly was, how soon that they would have to be prepared to manage it. The blue here is indicating areas that were infested, and the yellow were counties where there was at least one individual find. Most of these were dead insects, but where a dead spotted lanternfly was found, it might indicate a pathway where live insects could show up and a new infestation could get started. So um, here we have some of the work that we've done. We established a listserv that was to mostly extension educators, but included others as well, including educators like high school teachers and faculty at other colleges and universities that wanted to talk about spotted lanternfly in their biology classes. We did webinars, which was really important, especially during the COVID years, and also gave presentations to extension groups. We're called on by legislative assistants and to get briefings on that, and also directly to residents. And to residents, the message was clear. If you see it, report it. That's what we wanted because at that time we did not have it in New York State, and we wanted to detect it as early as possible. And it's easy to detect when you have a lot like this, but we liked showing these images because although it is a spotted insect that's very distinct, it can go unnoticed. And in fact, in one location in New York State, it probably was undetected for 2, maybe even 3 years. So if we take a look at the tree on the right, there are spotted lanternfly there, but they're hard to pick out. Amazingly camouflaged there, but with these arrows, you can see that spotted lanternfly is there. So um, we really wanted to get the message out about that. We were also, once it came into New York in 2020, in on Staten Island, we there were a lot of concerns. It was showing up in people's backyards and sometimes in large numbers. And there were some cases of misuses of pesticides where people were kind of panicking. And so we wanted to get the message out in New York City at that time that spotted lanternfly don't bite, they don't sting, They're not going to end up in the house like stink bugs. We did some informal studies and found that they could only survive for about 48 hours when they're not feeding on a tree at room temperature. So, yeah, people in Google were asking these kinds of questions. So early on, when it moves into an area and they're not familiar with it, um, people were very concerned. Some of our other early work were to make presentations available to the extension system. So we had PowerPoints and video clips available so they could be used for local outreach. We also had um, some social media at the time. We were using Twitter when it was around, and then we moved on to Facebook, and we were still pretty active on Facebook, having several releases through the year with some key information. Early on, before it was in New York State, we had some spotted lanternfly detection kits that we put together that we sent out through the extension system. And really, it was to empower people, to remind them to look for spotted lanternfly. We had these cards inside. These are business size cards that have the key information. They also have the reporting portal link that New York State Ag and Market set up and was monitoring and still is monitoring. And there is also information and a link to our website that has additional info there. So where are we now? This is the most recent map that we're maintaining, and I'll mention that we at New York State IPM are maintaining this national map. If anybody has information of counties that aren't represented as they should be here, send us an email and we'll get that corrected. We'll have another update in probably about a month, and we know we have some additional counties to add over here. But yeah, so you can see it's spread quite a bit in New York, but it's not widespread. So here we have the diffuse spread. So it's moved its way up into the Hudson Valley and out on Long Island, and it's just starting to reach the Finger Lakes. And we'll take a close look at all of those. But this is a little bit better. This map just shows the individual counties that are colored in here. But if we take a look here, that a map that New York State Ag and Markets maintains, this is more of a heat map. So you can see we have a lot of spotted lanternfly here, including New York City, and I can't ignore New York City. And maybe this is a heads up to other urban areas that might encounter spotted lanternfly, that it gets a lot of attention. So Chicago, Boston, Raleigh, heads up on what might be coming. They were contacting us a lot to have quotes in the articles, but yeah, it did not go ignored. Spotted lanternfly were there. There was plenty of Atlantis in the New York City area, and even the New York Post got in on this. And I'll tell you, Jacob did a fine job, even in this article, being a voice of reason for their sensational headline there. And hey, did you see this? It made it onto Saturday Night Live. Bowen Yang did an excellent job being a spotted lanternfly there. Great costume, and it is on YouTube if you want to see that. We heard from our Ag and Market partners that the reports of spotted lanternfly went way up after that aired. So I don't know what that tells us exactly. But this was 2023. I was in Brooklyn, not too far there from the Brooklyn Bridge, and it felt like it was raining under this Atlantis tree with spotted lanternfly, with hundreds of them up in the canopy. And here you can see the copious amount of honeydew that was there on a plant below the Atlantis tree. So we have going on there. So let's move up into the Hudson Valley. So there's a really important Hudson Valley grape growing region here, and we're monitoring this. The first case of it in a vineyard occurred in 2022, And I guess it's important to let everyone know that we're just now late last year, and we anticipate more this year. The numbers have built to the point where management is now necessary. So just if there's one on the vineyard or in that area, it's going to take time for the populations to build so that treatment is necessary. So there is a little lag time, at least for us up here in New York. It may be different in southern states where the populations could increase faster. And then moving around, I think there could be some insights that others might find interesting here as we look at other places. We're going to start in Binghamton, and we're going to look at Syracuse, Buffalo, and Rochester here. One thing that is consistent is that in these areas, the populations were associated with rail lines and particularly rail sidings. And you can see here where it first popped up in Binghamton, we have a rail siding there. And here we are in East Syracuse, New York, the only population there. And it's right near a couple of rail sidings too. And so, what we're thinking here is possibly that spotted lanternfly was laid on boxcars in one of the infested areas in New York City, in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and then moved to another area. And if it's there in the springtime, those eggs can hatch. And often along rail lines, there are ailanthus trees that they can set up shop at. So that's also the case in our Buffalo, New York, in the western side of the state, where it is near a couple of rail sidings. So something to watch out for if you're in a state that is monitoring for spotted lanternfly. And in East Syracuse this past year, we were visiting that site and just noticed the association with yellow jackets going after the honeydew there. So one of the important grape growing regions is the Finger Lakes. It's just now being detected there. And I'd like to mention too that both of these infestations that were found in 2024 were found by trained entomologists that knew what they were looking for. So it makes us think that it's probably out there in other areas, but we're just not picking it up yet. So the need for outreach continues on. Some of the current recommendations for our grape growers is, that monitoring is really important, especially late in the season, before harvest and after harvest. Knowing, and we heard this earlier today, that they move in from surrounding trees, so paying particular attention to the edge of blocks is really important. There are good insecticide options. You heard about that too. We maintain a list on our website. New York tends to be the most restrictive in our region, so we have the products that can be used for grapes on our website for our growers there, and we maintain that updated annually. And, we're lucky we have some really great specialists, and they've been on top of it, letting their growers know that about spotted lanternfly, how close it is, and giving them updates for recommendations. And our partners at our New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, our regulatory agency, they sent me this list to report out. They weren't in on the program yesterday, and they really do remain committed to the grape industry, really watching our Western New York juice grape growing region, because as we heard on Monday, the machine harvesting is bringing in the spotted lanternfly in a test anyway. It's not in that region yet, but they know it could pose some challenges, so we're watching that closely. They also continue, if spotted lanternfly is in one of those jump areas where it's moved into a new area, they'll delimit that. They'll do a survey very thoroughly, marking the limits of those new infestations. They're looking at their decisions for how they'll treat this based on some of the research that is coming in, some of the new management techniques, what biocontrols are available, those kinds of things. Early on, for example, we didn't know if Ailanthus was required to allow spotted lanternfly to complete its life cycle. And like many of us, they're anxiously awaiting the spotted lanternfly budget from the USDA and see where we'll be at going forward from this year. For this year, I wanted to, before I finish up, also talk about a new study that was done by a colleague of ours at Cornell, who's now part of the New York State IPM program. And Alan Pinto did this economic study based on information from Penn State and applying it to two grape growing regions in New York State, and that is the area along Lake Erie and in the Finger Lakes. And the question is, what would happen if spotted lanternfly moved in, as it has in other areas, and nothing was done? What would the impact be to the economy there? And not much had been done looking at the economic impact of spotted lanternfly. There was one study out of Penn State early on, but this is before we knew exactly what kind of damage spotted lanternfly would do. It was concerning. There was big concern about the lumber and wood products industry. Some of that probably is not as big a concern, but it certainly is for our grape and wine growing industry. And as I mentioned, it's really important. So for us in New York State, and the assumption that Alan made for his study, that he was looking at grape varieties, red and white. And in the first year, he was looking at 3 years and then subsequent years after that. And he was assuming that farmers were not adding any new insecticides. As I mentioned, this was like a worst case scenario. What would happen if no treatment was done? And the spotted lanternfly impact on the first year, he was assuming a reduction in price. And this is because even if the quantity is the same, some of the research that has happened at Penn State has shown that the quality has been reduced. Less sugars, less volatiles, so a 3% reduction in price there. And the second year, both you have that quality decreased and the production has also declined. And then left unchecked, we're talking about 8% reduction in quantity and a 10% reduction in price. And so what that looks like when the numbers are carried out, and I believe Alan is on. If there's any questions, they can go into the Q&A. He can provide further information on that. But, you know, the bottom line is we could have an $8 million annual loss to our production with spotted lanternfly not going checked. We know that it will be managed, but this just underscores the importance of managing spotted lanternfly. And how am I? I'm over time, aren't I, Jacob? So I'll probably wrap up there, and we will pass it on here to our next speaker. Please feel free to put any questions in there. I will stop sharing. All right. And next up, we have Ashley Leach from Ohio State University. There we go. All right, Ashley, when you're ready to share your screen, you can do that. Thanks for joining us today.
So I, as a brief introduction, I'm the specialty crop entomologist at Ohio State University. So I'm tasked with having to hopefully develop effective pest management programs for my stakeholders, and they're very diverse. But when I walked into this position in 22, spotted lanternfly was kind of hanging over all of these specialty crops. And admittedly, now we've kind of realized, we can winnow that down to really the impact is pretty significant with grape production. So looking at 2022, we had 2 counties when I started my position with active infestations of spotted lanternfly, which you see here. Moving forward a year, we're seeing 4 counties. And then finally, now where we are in 2025, we have 12 counties with active infestations of spotted lanternfly. And you saw that there was a really rapid, quick, in the span of 2-3 years, we're seeing it go from 2 counties to 12 counties. So really rapid expansion of this pest across Ohio State. And if we look kind of at this finer scale map, which was produced by the Ohio Department of Agriculture, it allows us to see kind of what the infestation is across the state. And what's particularly notable with this map is the stronghold of spotted lanternfly in these bigger cities. So think of Toledo, think of Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland. This is where we're seeing really large outbreaks of spotted lanternfly, but we certainly see that it's scattered across the entire state in total. So it's rapidly spreading, and that kind of then begs the question of what do we do about it and why does it matter? And so specifically as a specialty crop entomologist, why I care about this is because of these maps that I'll be sharing with you. We're not New York. We don't grow 30,000 acres of grape. We grow between 1,000 to 2,000 acres of grape, but we're still ranked nationally in terms of the production. We have a good amount of grape production, and you can see that a lot of that is concentrated, in the northeastern part of the state. But I think what's even more important is when we look at the number of wineries we have across the state. And so you'll see that we've got over 320 wineries in Ohio. And so once again, if you reference the maps I just shared with you on spotted lanternfly infestations, you can already see how if we start doubling, tripling up these maps, we have some areas that are potentially more vulnerable to spotted lanternfly infestations and could have a pretty significant impact to these industries. And a real testament to that is the fact that in a recent evaluation of the wine industry in Ohio, it was well over $2 billion in economic value. And that's largely due to the fact that we have these wineries, we have a large amount of agrotourism, we have people traveling within state and out of state to visit the wineries and to, visit the vineyards as well. So we're seeing that there's a lot of economic value here, and there's a lot of vested interest into maintaining healthy vines. We have a new vineyard program, or a program that's been continuing to expand, called the Vineyard Expansion Assistance Program, where they're providing up to $9,000 to some of our producers that are adding vineyards. So it's also something our growers want to do. They want to expand their operations as well. But with spotted lanternfly being this looming threat, we're trying to understand, okay, to what degree does that matter? And to what degree can we educate to slow and mitigate the spread of this pest in Ohio? So we've already talked about this a good amount, but this is obviously why our growers are so concerned, is because of graphs like this. This was data that my sister and I published back 5 years ago, and we know Floor presented similar data showcasing these significant declines in yield with increasing infestations of spotted lanternfly. So then that begs the question, what do we do about that? How do we prepare our stakeholders? How do we mitigate or slow the impact of this pest in grape production in particular? And so when I started my position in 2022, there were 2 prongs that I had. The first was I wanted to monitor for spotted lanternfly in grape production in Ohio. And this is not just a trying to understand where it is and educate the stakeholders, but it was also to understand what are the different covariates that might be important to inferring where that bug is jumping within the grape agro-ecosystem. And then secondly, to develop interactive extension opportunities for our grape stakeholders and for the public more broadly. So first, to jump in and talk a little bit about the sampling that we're doing for spotted lanternfly across the state. What you see are the kind of concentrated area is shown in red, which is where we have a lot of our scouting activity. Although we do have some southern sites, most of them have been in that northeastern quadrant due to the predominance of SLF and grape acreage in that area. And by 2024, we doubled the amount of vineyards that we were monitoring for spotted lanternfly. And we just finished up asking our growers, hey, do you want us to sample it for you for spotted lanternfly in 2025? And we had a scary moment of realizing 60 vineyards signed up in 2025. So this is definitely at the forefront of our stakeholders' minds as well, in terms of scouting and sampling for this insect across Ohio. I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful postdoc, Dr. Natalie Constancio, who's leading this effort. So you might all ask, you've been scouting for spotted lanternfly for 3 years. Have you found anything? And I'd say we found very little thus far. So in 22, we had 0 vineyards with spotted lanternfly. Granted, we don't have a huge sample number, but 32 in 2024 with 2 of those vineyards with active spotted lanternfly infestations. So that's kind of what we're doing right now, specifically working with the producers. But then the second question was, how do we interact with more than just our producers? How do we interact with the public or those who might have vested interest in protecting grape acreage from spotted lanternfly? And that's where we have to enter into this paradox of invasive species education, because we have to convince everybody passionately that this bug is everywhere and we need to be worried about it because it could be a problem. We need to slow the spread. But in many cases, like when I started out in 22, I didn't have the bug in my backyard. I couldn't walk out and say, well, this is what it looks like, da 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 da. So now we kind of frequently will find ourselves, all right, let's use pictures, let's use pin specimens. And what we decided in 2022 in collaboration with Dr. Andy Michael was, let's use 3D printing and let's pair 3D printing with experiential learning opportunities to really bolster some of these extension activities that have already been done by really wonderful extension educators like Amy Stone with OSU Extension. And we initially targeted egg masses because they often look like a lot of other things. They're the most cryptic thing, life stage of spotted lanternfly. And if you go online, you'll see these types of definitions. And so what we wanted to do is to really heighten the awareness of spotted lanternfly egg masses. We've since moved on to other life stages as well. But we were able to create these prototypes originally developed by Olivia Lang that are shown here, to use them as outreach tools. And this is obviously something that was shared at the SLF Summit, but we were able to pair this both in a kind of walk away item that people could take from extension events, which are shown here. So we've got these keychain rings with the kind of fake prototypes of SLF egg masses. And so on those different keychain rings, we have additional information shared. So, we've handed this out at state fairs, at, you fill in the blank, whatever event, doorbuster prizes, to help raise awareness for spotted lanternfly. And fortunately, we have some really excellent scientists and artists, frankly, like Saranga Basnagala, who was able to even improve upon these prototypes. And that's really a strength of 3D printing, is to improve these prototypes to keep evolving that forward. So you see this as a keychain, but what we can also do is just use those 3D prints, those little egg masses without that backing, which is actually, sorry to go back, but this right here, to use these types of 3D prints that are shown here, which are just the egg masses, and then actually combining that with a scavenger hunt, so an egg mass hunt, particularly popular around Easter. You can make it like an Easter egg hunt. But what we did is kind of made this a interactive thing where we have a traditional PowerPoint presentation. Hey guys, this is spotted lanternfly. This is why you should care about it. But then in the second half of the event, what what we do is we take them outside. We take all the participants outside to do this egg mass hunt. And that's what you're seeing here, where we've already placed the egg masses in the surrounding landscape, outside of whatever the event center would be. And then we have people go in and actually kind of pseudo scout, apply their skills to actually looking for these spotted lanternfly egg masses. And we have this QR code. You just scan the QR code, and then it will give you a Qualtrics link that will pop up, indicate, did you find an SLF egg mass? And then they take a picture of it. So it's a really easy, seamless process. And it will just in real time give us that information of what people are seeing, and whether or not it kind of speaks to some of the stakeholder biases, which we're doing some additional testing with now. But it's a fun event. We get to put these egg masses all over the place. A lot of times we'll stick them on the podium so people kind of, hey, did you look at this? Did you look at that dumpster? Did you look over here? And it can be a really fun event as well. So what we're seeing is people really like these interactive experiences. They learn new information. They plan to use that information. That's kind of the bare basic of what we want from this. But more importantly, they're also gaining knowledge, right? We see that 100% leave knowing how to identify adults, 95% can identify egg masses, and then 86% can even identify some of the signs and symptoms associated with spotted lanternfly. So overall, this remains to be a very powerful tool in our toolbox to educate the public, educate our stakeholders in utilizing some of these 3D printing applications. So they have this takeaway item that can be really useful and powerful. And then also how we're able to deploy our scouting and monitoring to some of our most vulnerable agro-ecosystems like Ohio's grape industries. So with that, I'm going to end with this slide, which is a ploy to you all. If you are interested in replicating this 3D printed egg mass hunt, please go ahead, scan this QR code. It will give you a Google form. We will send you a 3D printed SLF kit. It will have all the resources you need to replicate this event in wherever you are. The only thing we ask is that you give us some feedback on how well it went or how we can improve the extension experience. So with that, I thank you, and I hope I've got a minute or two for questions.
Yes. If anyone has a question, they should put it in the Q&A, and we can see if there's anything in there that you could answer live. So do you share the code that is used for the 3D printers if somebody has a 3D printer in their state and would like to print an egg mass?
Yes, so we are totally open to sharing that. Right now, it's not been posted online. I think we're just trying to figure out what the appropriate repository is for posting the STL file. If you need it, just email me, and I can get you hooked up with the file.
It's what a great idea, though, to have people practice looking for egg masses, getting them out there. So that was great. Really appreciate your presentation. And let's see. Do we have any? I don't think there's any. There was a question about the budget for Ohio. I don't know if you're in a position to answer how Ohio is handling spotted lanternfly monetarily.
To be frank with you, I should leave that question with Jonathan Shields, who is much more
Okay.
educated in all of that. I don't know how the actual state budget is lining up with that, because frankly, we actually have a lot of invasive species that seem to be hitting at the same time. Maybe
Mhm.
every other state's dealing with this, but I know there's been conversation about, I believe box tree moth, or
Yes.
boxwood tree moth, excuse me,
Mhm.
is also, vying for support, financial support as well. So there's a lot all at once. I'm sure
And then
everybody.
there's beach leaf disease too. So yes. All right. If there's any other questions, please put them in the Q&A, and actually we'll handle them there and type them out. And now we're going to move on to Elizabeth Barnes. And she comes to us from Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. They've done a great job in their outreach, and I had a chance to hear Elizabeth about a month ago, and looking forward to hearing her presentation today. So, Elizabeth, when you're ready, you can unmute, turn on your video, and then share um, your screen. And wow, it looks like you're upside down in the woods there, Elizabeth.
Does. I don't know why I'm upside down, so I'm just gonna turn off the video because I don't know how to fix
Or
that.
go with it either, however you'd like to handle that. And then whenever you're ready to share.
All right. So, can you see the screen now?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to go over some of the information about some of the ways that we've been dealing with outreach around spotted lanternfly in Massachusetts. So just kind of give you some context. We've had spotted lanternfly, or at least a known population of spotted lanternfly in Massachusetts since 2021. Initially, we had only a few populations in Massachusetts. I was kind of able to rattle off the list of known areas with spotted lanternfly until last fall, at which point we got reports of and found significantly more populations of spotted lanternfly, and I can't keep track of the full list in my head anymore. There's enough of them at this point. You can see on this map the various municipalities where we found spotted lanternfly. It's, somewhat in the eastern part of the state, a little bit in the center part of the state, but really those populations are fairly scattered all over. The other part of these new populations is that last fall we found that in the areas that had spotted lanternfly for quite some time, that we saw that very typical uptick in the number of reports and also the number of individual lanternflies that people were finding on their trees that they were reporting last fall. So that led to some complications in terms of responding to those reports, but I'm not going to have time to kind of get into that right now. So in doing outreach, we did all sorts of different things. We had presentations, we did tabling events. We distributed outreach materials throughout the state. So we mailed all sorts of materials out to people. We have newsletter, blog, social media, and many other things. But I wanted to focus in on just a couple of projects that we did, as well as a couple sort of things that I think might be helpful for people who are just initially dealing with spotted lanternfly. So first off, we really wanted to make sure we were encouraging reporting from the public, because the public is extremely good at spotting spotted lanternfly, as I'm sure many of you who have it already in your state are aware. Well, most of our reports of new areas with spotted lanternfly were from the general public. So we wanted to make sure that we were encouraging that and trying to encourage it kind of strategically. But the kind of issue with this is that when you're doing outreach, you often like to try and have specific audiences that you're focusing on. But when your audience is essentially anyone who might notice an insect, that's incredibly broad. And of course, we did, do some focused outreach on people like people in the green industry, people who are spending a lot of time outdoors. For example, we had a lot of luck doing outreach events at hunting and fishing expos, as well as with master gardeners and other groups like that. But there's still that broad section of the public that we're not necessarily capturing when we're doing outreach to those groups. So we wanted to also try and do outreach to that general audience in areas where they were already spending time. So we did a postering campaign with our mini posters. They're the size of just a standard sheet of paper, so that anyone can print them off our website if they want them. But we also have some kind of nice glossy versions that we'll mail out to people. And we did this in a few different stages. So we went online, we found a list of libraries. We went through each of those libraries and found contact information for the librarians wherever we could. And that included librarians at public libraries, museum libraries, if it seemed appropriate to the content of that museum, high schools and colleges. And then we sent an email to them and we offered to send them outreach materials and also do presentations if they were interested. And we got a lot of feedback from those librarians where a lot of them were interested in materials. And we also set up some presentations based on that. And one in particular that I wanted to highlight that I can't take credit for because it was the idea of a science teacher that one of the librarians forwarded the email to, was this science teacher got really excited when she saw that we had these origami spotted lanternfly patterns available. And so she took those patterns in her science class, or with her science class, and she taught the students about the biology of spotted lanternfly and how they're related to and invasive insects in general. And then she partnered with the art teacher who then had a class where she included those origami patterns, taught the kids about origami, but also about spotted lanternfly at the same time. And so this was both a really great collaboration and also having that tactile project where they were able to, fold these patterns helps reinforce the information about the spotted lanternfly that they were learning. We also reached out to our state and national parks about getting our mini posters up there and rail trails. So for the rail trails, we made a list of the rail trails throughout our state and found any sort of rail trail friends organization or other organization that was charged with taking care of those rail trails. And also reached out to them. And we were particularly interested in rail trails. Even other types of trails are important for outreach as well, but we thought rail trails would be good to emphasize because a lot of them have tree of heaven along them because they were former rail lines. There's a lot of foot traffic on them because they're these nice flat trails that are often connecting important parts of the city. So in some areas, people use them for commuting. And also for some people, I've seen a lot of, older people who might have difficulty walking on a trail that's going up and down, up and down. That's how they get their exercises. They walk on these trails because they're nice and flat and even. So that's a really kind of wide range of different people on these trails. And also they have bulletin boards, which is useful because we need to be able to put our flyers up somewhere. So we reached out to these groups and initially we just wanted to basically get permission to put up our mini posters on the boards, but a lot of them said like, hey, if you mail us some posters or if you give us the PDF so we can print them out, we'll do it for you, which was, awesome because then, they know the bulletin boards that people are most likely to look at along the trails. And also it saved us some time and travel. And so we really appreciated that partnership with those groups. And then finally, we also wanted to make sure we were not just reaching the municipalities that already had spotted lanternfly, but the surrounding municipalities, because many of those initial places where we were finding spotted lanternfly were in major cities that people are going in and out of every day, whether they're commuting or whether they're going to buy things in those cities, or there's often shipping hubs in those areas where stuff is going out from as well. And so we wanted to reach those people who are in those bordering towns to see if any new populations were sprouting up in those areas, because there were a lot of vectors going in into those surrounding municipalities. So we once again made a list of the municipalities and then made a list of the coffee shops, cafes, bookstores, country stores, libraries, and post offices in each of them. And the reason why we chose these particular places is because these are places where many people are going on a regular or semi-regular basis. They're often lingering there. So for example, you might be in line at the country store, or you might spend some time drinking your coffee after you order it, or even just waiting for your coffee to order to come up. You might kind of glance around and see what's around there. And then finally, most importantly, a lot of these places are kind of gathering hubs for the local community and have bulletin boards again, or might have a place where people can put business cards and other things like that. So we thought these were important places to be reaching people. So once we had that list, it was quite long. So doing it all at once didn't seem like a good idea, just given the number of other things that were going on. So we shared this with our, wider group of people working on spotted lanternfly. And then whenever somebody had, maybe something that they were working on got done an hour early, or they were planning on being out in the field, but then it rained unexpectedly or something like that, they could pull up this list and just make sure they have some of these mini posters with them and go out and hang up some of these posters. And I should also note, we did also have an intern last summer who did quite a bit of this as well, which was really great. But in that way, we're sort of piecing it out over time so that it's not too much of a burden on any one person at once to get all these flyers out. And we had a lot of really great responses. We had some people who actually sent in a report and specifically mentioned seeing the flyers and some of the locations that we had recently put up posters in. So that was really great to see. Then I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the kind of complications we ran into in doing outreach about spotted lanternfly. And one of the big ones was people's expectations about what spotted lanternfly would be like. Many of them, it was largely shaped by their previous experience with other invasive insects in the state. In Massachusetts, one of the most common, there's kind of two really common invasive species people are familiar with. One is spongy moth, and the other is the Asian longhorn beetle. So just in brief, I'll talk about Asian longhorn beetle because that's the biggest one that came up. But Asian longhorn beetle kills trees once they get into it. They're a wood-boring insect. There are really effective eradication programs that have worked really well so far in many areas throughout the country. But those eradication programs involve cutting down the host trees and destroying them, so chipping them up really small, things like that. And in Massachusetts, we have an ongoing eradication project program in Worcester that many people are really familiar with because some of the trees that had to be removed were in residential areas, which hit a lot of people really hard, even though they knew, that this needed to be done to protect the broader trees in the state and in nearby states. It was still a very emotional experience for a lot of people, and so it stays in people's memories. So when we're talking to people about spotted lanternfly, some of the things that tended to come up were people, because they were familiar with Asian longhorn beetle, often thought that we would be able to totally eradicate spotted lanternfly. And so that's something where we had to kind of shift our messaging a little bit to make sure it was clear what people should be expecting with spotted lanternfly, that we were going to do our best to slow it down and knock down their numbers, but that nobody had had success completely eradicating it yet. And then the other thing that came up quite a bit is the methods that people expected us to use to deal with spotted lanternfly. People, many of them were genuinely very, very afraid when they were submitting reports that this meant that they were going to lose the trees in their yard. And were, very relieved when we talked to them and explained that that wasn't the control method people tend to use for spotted lanternfly. But there was still that kind of initial worry and hesitation there. So we had to, again, try to shift our messaging to make sure people knew what to expect when dealing with spotted lanternflies. So just kind of to wrap up this little bit, what I would say is if you're just getting spotted lanternfly in your state or you don't have it yet, it's worthwhile to kind of sit down and think about, all right, what are the invasive insects that people are most familiar with in my state? What are the things that I tend to hear people saying about those invasive insects when I talk to them? Kind of what are the things that come up again and again? And based on that, what's the similarities and the differences with spotted lanternfly, and how should I tailor my outreach messaging based on that? Okay, I think I'm running over time, so I'm going to skip that slide. But I also really wanted to quickly talk about some materials that we put together. So we have scraper cards, like many people do, lookalike guides that have been extremely popular. Those tend to be one of the first things people reach for at our table. We also put together a management guide even before spotted lanternfly was widespread in our state. And I'm very grateful that we did this, because now that it's popping up in more areas and we're seeing higher numbers of them, this has been an invaluable resource to be able to hand to people ahead of time. So having that prepared ahead of time was really useful. I mentioned the origami already. We have holographic spotted lanternfly stickers, which again, those are kind of something flashy that often pulls people to the table who might not otherwise be interested in invasive insects, but they want that holographic sticker, so they'll come over so they can grab it. And then we last year, I think it was, we got our bookmarks printed up, and these have been very popular. So we were thinking about them and thinking more about distributing them to libraries, and maybe they would be something more kids would be interested in. But actually at industry events, so like green industry expos, things like that, these have been pretty popular with that audience too. Then we also put together 3 videos, one about inspecting a vehicle for spotted lanternfly, the impacts of spotted lanternfly, and managing spotted lanternfly. All of these are animated. They're about 3 to 4 minutes long, so they're short and sweet. They give people an overview, which again has been really helpful, particularly that management video, because people who don't want to read the full guide can get an idea of the management available to them and what makes sense and what might not necessarily work to do what they're hoping for. We also have the graphics from each of these. So we have each of like the little spotted lanternflies, the transparency and the truck and things like that. So we can use those to make other outreach resources later. And we also have translations of these in Spanish and Portuguese as well. Okay, and if anyone is interested in adapting any of those materials for their state, please let me know. We are more than happy to share the files with you. You can put in your own reporting information or anything like that you might be interested in. And with that, I think I am out of time. So I will, my contact information is here. If you want to reach out to me, you can do it that way. And I can also answer any questions that might be in the chat.
Well, that's great. A lot going on there in Massachusetts. It's great that you're on top of it, and thank you for that presentation. Yeah, please put your questions in Q&A if you have any, and we can address those. We have one more speaker, and then we'll go to an open forum where we can have some discussion. But we're really happy to have with us today Cecilia Sequeira from the Public Affairs. She's a Public Affairs Specialist at the USDA APHIS. So, Cecilia, if you'd like to share. Glad to see you today.
Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes, looks great. Thank you.
Very good. So good afternoon, all. Excited to be here. My name is Cecilia Sequeira. You'll see a K at the beginning of my email, so that might throw a few people off when you see me in print, but go by Cecilia. I work in public affairs at USDA APHIS, and one of the things that came up earlier, so before I go into the presentation about outreach and media resources, I wanted to address just a couple of the things that I heard in earlier presentations. Fantastic, work being done across the nation. Really great tactics in place. I mentioned heard a couple of people mention funding, and so I did want to reiterate that the PPA Act, the 7721 Plant Protection Act, has some outreach funding, Goal 5 outreach funding, that is announced in January for the previous year, or February, early February or late January. We did put something out for last year's applications that are this year's funding, and we will have another open period announcement in the summer. So if you want to do outreach, and if you have other pests, recommend doing, like a joint outreach suggestion. We call them suggestions, but application, and share how you're going to measure your impact. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on what that looks like. in its most effective forms, but definitely, demonstrate how you think you'll get the most return on the investment for each one of those applications. But that's definitely something that I wanted to mention. And by the way, here I have my, this boot smashing out the SLF. We didn't come up with this graphic. We find great stuff across the nation all the time. So thanks to whoever created this. Was probably Penn State or one of the other participants here. You definitely all are very well informed about the spotted lanternfly, so I won't go into a lot of detail about the threat, but it attacks more than 100 species of plants, including grape and hops. That early detection is vital to its management, and that human-assisted spread is its main contribution to its movement. So in 2014, it was in Pennsylvania. Now we've got it in 18 states. That didn't happen by the power of its own wings. This is not a pest that flies very well. It is definitely a very successful hitchhiker, though. And so I think that when you're doing outreach, it's really critical that people understand why we're asking the public to look. So when you're thinking about the biology and demonstrating that in the most mainstream audience ways, please remember to help them understand why it's not just the regulatory agencies who, respond to invasive pests who are, involved in this fight, but why we're also enlisting the public. It's important that they understand that human-assisted pathways are the way that this moves long distances, because it can't do that on its own. So when you build those outreach plans, help them understand that human-assisted movement part of this pest, as well as other hitchhikers. We heard about some wood boring pests earlier. Lots of hitchhiking pests out there that do a massive amount of damage, and which we want to stop in its tracks, but we really need the public's help for that. And you've heard about some really great outreach being done that really is tactile. It connects to all the senses. You've got, the 3D printed that we heard about earlier with the egg masses, where you can really see what they look like at the, what the covering looks like and what the eggs beneath that. That's fantastic. And it's definitely, what corporate America has been employing for a long time. It's great to see all of this in government at the state and federal level now, where people are doing interactive displays in outreach, sort of an experiential activity, not just a, hey, let me talk to you about this and hand you a piece of paper, but rather let's do this fun thing where you can be engaged in an activity that is educational, but something that you're going to emotionally connect to and really remember as a core, fun activity with the family, so to speak. That is really a great way to enlist the public in this outreach, in this effort, and get them to want to help. When you're asking residents to assist, make sure that they understand what quarantines, where the quarantines are in your state, and ask them to check, their vehicles and outdoor items. Wheel wells, half the people probably have never looked under their cars into the wheel wells to see if there's mud-like egg masses there, but that's a spot they like to lay those egg masses. So make sure that you're giving them the visuals as you're giving them these calls to action, and really set up those expectations. We heard I think from Elizabeth saying, in some cases their expectation was that they would take out the entire tree, and that, if they call or they cooperate with these agricultural workers coming in to do surveys, then maybe they'll lose their tree. So make sure that when you have people coming out to survey, to check traps or survey in an area, that you let people know what is happening, who's coming, what are they doing, how will it help, demonstrating what will be happening and why it's beneficial to them will really help improve compliance. And for us, every time we do a radio media tour, we have a SME, a subject matter expert out there, and they do just a battery of 3 to 12 interviews in a localized area saying, hey, this is what's coming, this is why we're doing it, this is what we need from you, please help us. We see increased compliance, and so that is something we do every single year. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what those when we do that, and how you can take advantage of some of those resources when we do that. But yeah, definitely want to share with people what they can do to reduce the spread, and think about your reporting forms. And this one's really key. Please have a spot on your reporting forms for pests that says, how did you hear about this pest? And if you did an ad, have a little button there for, I had heard about it on a social media ad. And if you did a billboard, have a button there for heard about it, saw it on a billboard, and have a little box there where people can write in something else, so that you know where your outreach is working and where it's not. Like maybe it's all word of mouth, and then okay, well, we need to work on reaching people in XYZ methods. So definitely try to capture what you're doing on the reporting side of things. So definitely connect the outreach public affairs folks with the SPROs, and ensure that the reporting forms are capturing all of that. Here you've got some visuals that you can see. A quarter, everyone knows what a quarter looks like. When you are telling the story, use visual references to help clarify, demystify those scientific terms, like first instar nymph, they have no idea what you're talking about when you say that. But if you say, okay, well, here's a quarter, and here you can see all these different life stages, and this one happens in the spring, and this one happens in the summer, and this one, this egg mass you'll see in the late summer and fall and the winter. That will really help. And those timetables may vary from place to place. And if you're looking to find out what the localized timetable is for you, certainly we have experts who can help provide that information. But show, don't just tell. Like if you're saying, hey, these are hitchhiking pests, demonstrate with a picture of an egg mass on a wheel well of a car or an SLF adult on a windshield wiper. Help them see what it is that you're talking about. On the show don't tell side of things, we have videos, lots of great stuff. Here's one, protect plants during the hunt for bad eggs. This is a video not just about spotted lanternfly egg masses, but also spongy moth. So wonderful outreach tool there. Feel free to use that anytime. In fact, all of our resources are free to the public, free for everyone. We do love attribution. So if you can say, by USDA APHIS, we appreciate that, but it is free for all to use. It can be used in any platform. And we have spotted lanternfly B-roll, and we also have Flickr images of all life stages. So let us know if there's anything that we can help with on that. When you're telling the story, don't just show the pictures. If you're talking about black sooty mold, like paint a whole experience for them when you're saying that it's going to be a nuisance. Not just, oh, there's going to be a lot of them, and there's going to be, it can affect the understory plants too. It can block photosynthesis. Give them a whole immersion, right? Like explain what that could mean in their garden. The stench of the black sooty mold, because they won't know that until they get that black sooty mold there. The massive volume. It is much better to show them a picture like this than it's just to say there's going to be a lot of them. So really help appeal to those senses as much as possible when you're telling those stories. We do that with the Hungry Pest campaign. This uses PPA 7721 funding. And we also support other states and just the nation across the board when it comes to outreach. Our goals aren't just the spotted lanternfly. It's just lots of hungry pests, anything that is a hitchhiker and federally regulated. We try to raise awareness with the public about, what the signs and symptoms of those pests are, how they travel, what are the high-risk pathways. We've identified 9 of them. And we try to enlist the public in changing, their habits in little small ways just to reduce that spread, like cleaning their gear before they travel from one place to another, getting rid of the mud, so to speak. There's a great a NISMA campaign that we connect with in June every year, and that's Play Clean Go, and that connects to making sure the gear is clean. We have IPDAM, and I'll show you more about those different campaign events throughout the year in just a moment, another slide. But you want to enlist the public as much as possible in doing their part and tell them what they do, like what they can do. Give them specific actions, keep it pithy, but the more you tell them what to do, the better it is. And keep in mind that like 80–90% are going to be motivated by the carrot, but you do have a percentage that needs to hear about the stick. So penalties, you need to talk about them, because there will be some people who don't care so much about compliance unless it directly affects them. So keep that in mind, and the stick has to be real. So target audiences, movers, recreational enthusiasts, travelers, general public. It is important as much as possible to tailor your messaging to the individuals you're trying to reach. For geo-targeted messaging that we do, we might have keywords for gardening, planting, homeowners, people who are hiking during a recreational themed month. We want to make sure that we're targeting specific audiences, and that when we target that recreational audience, that we're talking about what they can do, specifically recreationalists, to reduce the spread. If we're talking about movers, we're showing that SLF checklist of here's what to look for on that outdoor patio furniture or on your vehicle before you travel from a quarantine state to a non-quarantine state. So think about the messaging in terms of who you're talking to. For our resources, I mean, you guys already know about stopslf.org. There's also the Penn State website, which has a lot of great stuff applicable nationwide, Hungry Pests as well, publications. All of our stuff we have as native files that we can transfer to you, so you can put your own logo on it, localize it. So keep in mind that you can do that, or you can just take the one that's national. And in some cases, when we have it printed, we can send it to you, the physical version. We do have the moving checklist, the scraper card, and the lookalikes guide in stock right now that we could send to you. Also, if you have a pending request with us, we did lose our graphic manager recently, so let me know if you had something pending with us and haven't received it yet, because there may need to be some follow-up on that. But we do aim to support everyone across the nation as much as we possibly can. That's a website. You can find it just by going to hungrypest.com, clicking on the threat, and then clicking on spotted lanternfly. And hungrypest.com does redirect to an aphis.gov webpage, but it's nice and easy to remember, which is why, we purchased that vanity URL and we use it during radio media tours. It's much easier for, our spokesperson to remember, as well as anyone who's listening to be able to navigate to. It has detection history, public information, imagery, lots of great resources on there. Definitely check that out. Moving too fast here. There we go. Pathways. So all the stuff I talked about before has a state-specific tracker. So when you're talking about federally quarantined pests, that is a great place to tell them to go to during your radio interviews, because they can click on the drop down, they can find the quarantine pests in their state. And these are federally regulated pests that we have on the Hungry Pest website. But if there's one that's a hitchhiker and is federally regulated, it's not on here, but you think we should consider it because it is a hitchhiker, let us know. We will certainly add to it. We also have business resources on there, like videos and handouts. We've got tattoos and stickers. These things are things that we can mail to you. So let us know if there's something that you want us to send to you. Until we run out, we'll be happy to do that. Survey materials. Moving too fast, sorry. And then for social media, just keep in mind that this is a mainstream audience and you really want to appeal to them from a creative, colorful, fun storytelling kind of way. And, if it threatens something they love, like beer or wine or their PB&Js, then show that to them, like, hey, this is vicious vintage or peanut butter nothing, like things that really kind of connect to them emotionally and are kind of fun, but also really tell that story as much as possible in a visual manner, because a lot of folks don't like to click on that link. So you want to give as much information as possible before the navigation to the link itself. Here are some contacts. I'll be happy to drop mine in the chat afterwards, or I can send you these slides if you like them. I am a domestic plant health spokesperson at USDA APHIS, and we've got Rhonda Santos for AQI, Agricultural Quarantine Inspection. And for wood boring pests, we have April Dawson. Here are some of our national observances. Firewood Month is a big one for the spotted lanternfly and spongy moth. You definitely want to make sure that they know that there could be egg masses on the firewood. There's a lot of reasons not to move it long distances. We want them to either source it locally or to buy certified heat treated firewood. We have IPDAM in April. That's Invasive Plant Pest and Disease Awareness Month. We always have creative that we've created for that year, which we can send to you in advance if you also want to participate in that. Moving month is a big one. May, a lot of folks are moving, so you definitely want to talk about spotted lanternfly in that month and make sure people know that they should be using that checklist to look at their outdoor items before they move from a quarantine area to a non-quarantine area. And I think I've covered everything that I meant to. Not a lot of time in the presentation today, but do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any. Let's see, in the Q&A that came up. I'm not seeing any, but if we can continue to monitor the question and answer, if you wouldn't mind doing that. And then right now, we'll open it up to a broader discussion too. Thank you very much, Cecilia, by the way. That was great reminders on educational techniques and to think about our audiences. So thank you for that presentation and sharing what's available for the resources. So really good to have that there. And then if you would stop share, we'll probably go now to an overall question and answer and discussion. And one of the questions that I saw that came up this morning was a question about removing Atlantis and if that's helpful around the vineyards. And, you know, I don't think we have a definitive answer, but for the grape growers that have been dealing with it, either in Virginia, I know we have some specialists here from Virginia who have had spotted lanternfly for a while. I don't know if you have any opinions on that and how it's worked for your vineyard managers. And if you could unmute and talk about that, or then if any other questions come up, please, to the audience, if you have any questions, put it in the Q&A. We can answer what we can live, and then we'll move to answer some online as well.
Brian,
Drew,
yeah, I can comment on that if you'd like me to.
please.
So we've had a mix of experiences amongst our growers. We've had some people who have actively managed tree of heaven around their vineyard, you know, using the standard sort of hack and squirt methods. And then we've had others who don't, or even have managed theirs, but then like we had a grower here this morning for our focus group, who mentioned that he manages it, but he actually backs up against the Shenandoah National Park. So he's like, you know, I can manage it right here, but I could see tons of tree of heaven over there that I can't manage. So I think it's really sort of grower and site dependent. I typically try to have a really frank discussion with any growers who are considering it, because as you all know, tree of heaven is really difficult to manage. And even just, you know, cutting it down may make things worse in some cases. So we even don't really have definitive guidance for Virginia Cooperative Extension, I don't think. I think we sort of answer it on a case-by-case basis. And then those that are trying it, you know, we're going to be following up with them about how they did it, if they thought it was worth it, and if they saw any tangible impacts to lanternfly populations on their vineyard site, but even within their vineyard too. So the jury's still out, but hopefully we'll have some, you know, responses soon on that.
Great to hear that, your experience there. Are any of the growers using the Atlantis as trap trees treated like with dinotefuran?
Yes, they are doing that. There has been a bit of grower interest in methods for that. And that's something that me and Doug Pfeiffer have been communicating to growers for, especially with some vineyards where like they may only have one edge up against the woods, and they've clearly defined, you know, like, oh, the lanternflies are coming from there, then, you know, it's an effective strategy. Or even, I have one grower I can think of that had 2 blocks and there was 3 tree of heaven in between. So he was like, should I remove them or should I just spray them? So he tried spraying them and found that that sort of interrupted their movement across the blocks as well. But yeah, it's sort of a mixed bag, I think. And I don't really know exactly what to recommend, to be honest, fully.
Sure. It probably depends on the situation. Yeah, thank you, Drew. And Julie, I see you're muted there.
Just kind of to add to that, it gets, you know, complex really quickly, right? Because, you know, perhaps ahead of an infestation that might, you know, reduce the likelihood of lanternfly being able to establish in a new area, but elsewhere, but it also, you know, could potentially push it onto an alternative host like grapes. And so the other issue is that it's not just a state, it's not been tested empirically. And so it really hasn't been cost effective enough to do so. So I think folks who were here at the meeting on Tuesday afternoon, you saw a presentation that Scott Salem from Virginia Tech gave on 2 different biological control agents that are, in the pipeline for control of tree of heaven, a weevil, the Atlantis tree weevil, and then the verticillium wilt. And so I just want to point out that Tracy Lesky at USDA ARS at the Appalachian Fruit Research Station, she's leading an area-wide grant that several of us are working on. Drew's a big part of that work, as is Scott and Doug Pfeiffer and others. And so with that, that's one place where we have permission to use one of these agents to test in limited spaces whether or not removing tree of heaven could reduce pressure on vineyards and incursion of SLF into vineyards. And so that's a 5-year study. We're just really kicking off like the end. We're at the end of year 1 really right now, but we haven't, it hasn't gone to field level yet. But that's one place where we think we might have some answers, or at least one study that can somewhat address that question, because that hasn't been done so far.
That's great. And yeah, that answers one of the questions that came up in the Q&A. How well does spotted lanternfly survive and reproduce without tree of heaven present? You're looking at it in the vineyard situation. Would you like to elaborate on that overall generally?
I mean, that's a tough one. And some studies that have been done where, lanternfly is constrained to a few potted plants given one or a couple of different hosts. What we've seen is that it tends to do better when it has access to tree of heaven, but in situations where it has not been given tree of heaven, it can survive and reproduce and develop and lay eggs. But here, this is where, if any of you have seen any talks I've given in the past, we need to ground truth these highly controlled lab studies and also semi-field studies with studying wild populations, because I mean, this thing feeds on over 100 different hosts, right? And so it's highly polyphagous. The alternative question there is, does it, and here it can feed on Chinaberry where tree of heaven isn't there, is it more that it requires multiple hosts rather than it requires any one big host? Like, that's the flip side question, right? I'll hand it off here to Amy.
Hi there. It's just, yeah, while we were talking, I was like, oh, I do have a slide about this. So this is one of those studies that you were talking about where we or they looked at removing tree of heaven from diet, and we saw like a drastic reduction in fecundity by spotted lanternfly. So this is kind of what we use as our evidence for like, why is removing tree of heaven still a viable strategy in the environment? And then too, since we're treating on the environmental scale, it's kind of like fighting an invasive with an invasive. So we remove what we can and then treating it still. Different in a vineyard situation, of course, but that's just kind of what we use for our rationale.
Thanks for sharing that, Amy. Yeah, we don't have our modeler. We talked about that earlier this week to talk about where we might see spotted lanternfly. One of the questions that came up is how far north spotted lanternfly will be reproductive. I think Rochester, New York is one of the most northern locations. I think it might be the most northern location right now. And they're doing quite well here, but that is along Lake Ontario. And I think that brings up a point. The microclimate can play a factor. So along coastal areas in Maine, maybe we'll see it there. But I would love for anyone else who's looked into this a little bit more to unmute yourself and give your opinion on how far north we might see spotted lanternfly.
Well, Brian, just kind of echoing the Rochester populations, I've been studying female reproductive development across this range. And so, as Brian knows, and some of you, we expected that looking at, how many growing degree days, how it takes, so how long it takes for females to become reproductively mature. We were thinking from earlier models that maybe even Rochester or areas farther north might be not warm enough long enough. But preliminary data, from what I've shown, just in terms of the weight that lanternfly females are able to amass, which is what they need to do to develop their eggs, they're able to really put on the weight very heavily and very quickly in Rochester. They seem to basically, it's almost like if you look at their mass acquisition as a function of degree day change, we had the fewest degree days in Rochester compared to sites where I compared female mass, if I'm making any sense here, like in Tennessee and North Carolina. And basically we had, the Rochester females were even ahead of the Tennessee and North Carolina females at a certain point in the season in terms of being able to just feed more heavily, more quickly. And that when we share this with researchers at an APHIS meeting, no models would have predicted that. So we don't really know. And so I'm sure that, like as Brian said, like perhaps, coast of Maine or whatnot, the season's just not going to be long enough at some point. But we need to always, ground truth our models against what is actually going on out there.
Right. Yeah, those higher elevation areas probably going to have a growing season that's too short. We don't expect it in New York's Adirondack area. Yeah, and we had one additional comment where somebody mentioned that there is a paper out of Korea that talks about trap crops in the Tree of Heaven next to vineyards, and that information is used to design some response in PA. So it's at least it's been looked at there, but we notice there is some differences in how spotted lanternfly responded in South Korea to the way it's behaved here. So probably ground truthing that in North America is important. All right. Any other comments or questions or things that we didn't get to, or we could a point that any of our panelists have that they would like to make?
Could I ask a question of Annie, if Annie's here from Tennessee? And my question was if, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Annie, but I'm just glad to see you. When we heard from the panel earlier, Amy told us that she was seeing, they were seeing lanternfly feeding on different hosts, in their state. And I was just wondering if you had any interesting, host observations of feeding, or, with the later time window before they probably die out in Tennessee, are you seeing them move on to anything unexpected?
Cindy, are you still on the meeting? If our entomologist is on, Cindy could probably answer that better than me.
And that put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, we saw, mostly vines, honeysuckle vines, lots on, we found poison ivy early on that we were really surprised to see. But I can check with Cindy and also get back with you on that.
Well, and the answer is, if the answer is not yet and nothing alarming, that's a fine answer.
Yeah. I don't think we've seen anything really alarming yet.
It looks like, Drew, you may have a comment on that.
Yeah, actually, I had a question for both of you, Annie and Julie, and anyone else, Amy too. I had someone ask me, have you ever seen lanternfly feeding on Paulownia or the Empress or Princess tree? Because we also have that as, I guess, an invasive tree around vineyards, particularly down in sort of central Virginia. And it's everywhere. And it also produces prolifically by seed. And yeah, I just was curious if that's another potential host.
We haven't seen that, but then the areas where we found spotted lanternflies so far, I haven't seen any Polonia. I do have some I'm trying to eradicate on my farm, so I will definitely keep an eye out for that when spotted lanternfly makes it that far west.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Hopefully it doesn't make it that far west, but if it does and you happen to find that, find out, let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're similar to Annie here. We haven't been looking for Paulownia specifically, but I can let you know if my temps see any on it.
And Paulownia is also from Asia, so there might be
Mhm.
that association with spotted lanternflies. That'll be interesting to see.
And it's almost time for Polonia to start blooming, so it should be pretty easy to spot.
Yeah.
If I could say something quick, I got to jump over to another call, but I wanted to put in a special shout out to the agenda committee. Brian and Jacob did a great job putting this together and running the show. Everybody that contributed, I know Kenny and Joy haven't been on. I don't believe maybe listening, but not as panelists. So they were contributors as well out of North Carolina and Oklahoma. So kudos to Julie and Brian and Jacob and everybody else that put this together. But I have to run. So great meeting,
Thank you,
everybody.
Scott.
Appreciate all the efforts. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Kept us going, Scott. So thank you for organizing. Right. Well, I think unless there's any other comments, that'll probably wrap us up for today. But feel free, last chance to chime in. Not. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to an announcement about the summit for 2026. And there will be recordings. Jacob, I don't know if you can unmute. You want to talk about where the recordings will be housed?
Yes, the recordings will be posted hopefully within the next month to stopslf.org. Look for the research updates tab where it says SLF Summit 2025. We'll have those up soon. And yeah, thank you to all our panelists, to all our speakers. Thank you for everybody who tuned in to attend this. And do reach out if you have any questions, if we can support your work, either researching or educating the public about spotted lanternfly. And with that, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Drew, you did such a great job. Oh my gosh, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie. I'm happy I could help. And yeah, thanks to you guys for the invitation. This was a lot of fun.
That freaks me out, all the mechanized harvesting on muscadines. Like, oh my gosh, like what did she say the size of the acreage was? It was huge. And
Yes.
like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's well, after being familiar with what you guys are doing up in Erie, I think when I was talking to everyone about muscadines, the gears started going, and I was like, huh, we should maybe talk about that. Yeah, and I'm curious. I don't know. I guess we don't really know how well it's going to establish in those major muscadine growing regions, but still, yeah, it's another thing to be concerned about for sure.
Well, and then even the whole issue is just to like process like what Brian had picked up on, and then we asked about, which was the whole issue of they have to use soil drenches because of the skittishness of the sharpshooters. Like I never thought of that, right? And just like, oh my gosh, there's 12 freaking species of sharpshooters that transmit Pierce's disease in the Southeast.
And there's actually one that we didn't mention that is more of a problem in Virginia. I think it's the broad-headed sharpshooter.
Oh yeah, that's the only one I've heard of, right?
Yeah. No, it's it's sort of a perfect storm that we're trying to figure out.
I think Holly might want to work with you on that more too.
Yeah, no, please. We're more than, I know it's well, after working on sort of it with Mizuho, and Christina and Michaela. Mizuho's been working on Pierce's disease for a while, so we're got things in the works here. And then there's a lot of people all throughout the South working on Pierce's disease or trying to. So I think there's a lot of people that you can sort of embed yourselves with here, and we're more than happy to help in any way possible.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks to you all again. I'll distribute the video to our growers. Got a lot of growers who couldn't make it today. There's other events happening, but they'll be excited to see all this content.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Jacob and Brian.
Thank you, Julie.